a German Shepherd abandoned on a remote island for months. Everyone thought survival was impossible in such harsh conditions. But what happened when a businessman on a luxury cruise unexpectedly discovered him will leave you speechless. This incredible journey of rescue turns into something no one could have predicted, revealing a truth that will change both their lives forever. Get ready for a story that redefines the meaning of destiny, courage, and the mysterious bonds that connect us all. The morning sun sparkled across turquoise waters as the luxury cruise ship Ocean Majesty glided through the Caribbean. Among the passengers was Jack Harrington, a 38-year-old Boston financial advisor who had finally given in to his doctor's advice to take a vacation before stress kills you. 3 days into the trip, Jack still couldn't disconnect, constantly checking his phone for non-existent signals, his mind trapped in spreadsheets and client portfolios rather than the paradise surrounding him. On the fourth day, the ship anchored near a small uninhabited island for a castaway beach experience. While other passengers eagerly prepared for beach games and barbecue, Jack wandered away from the group, seeking solitude along a narrow path cutting through dense vegetation, his designer shoes completely inappropriate for the terrain. 20 minutes in, perspiring and irritated, he reached a small clearing overlooking a secluded cove. That's when he heard it, a weak, hoarse bark that seemed to float up from the shoreline below. Jack froze, scanning the rocky beach. Movement caught his eye, something golden brown stumbling across the sand. A dog? Impossible. Yet there was no mistaking the German Shepherd's distinctive profile, though the animal was terribly thin, its once proud coat now dull and patchy. The dog collapsed, seemingly exhausted from that single effort. Without thinking, Jack scrambled down the rocky path toward the animal, slipping on loose stones, tearing his expensive shirt on thorny bushes. "How did you get here?" he whispered, approaching slowly. "Who left you behind?" The shepherd raised its head weakly, amber eyes meeting Jack's. Something passed between them, a recognition that neither understood but both instantly felt. When Jack extended his hand, the dog didn't growl or retreat. Instead, despite its weakened state, it pressed its muzzle into Jack's palm, a gesture of trust that pierced through Jack's carefully constructed emotional barriers. In that moment, something shifted within him, a dormant compassion awakening after years of corporate numbness. "I'm getting you out of here," Jack promised, surprised by the determination in his voice, as he carefully scooped up the weakened animal, feeling each rib beneath his fingers. He experienced a strange sensation, as if this random detour was somehow the most important thing he'd ever done. Jack cradled the German Shepherd against his chest, its body frighteningly light. With each labored breath the dog took, Jack felt an increasing urgency. This animal needed help immediately. The climb back up the rocky path proved challenging with his burden. But Jack persisted, driven by a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. By the time he reached the main beach area, his designer clothes were ruined. Sweat soaked his body, and his heart hammered with exertion. But none of that mattered. The dog's trusting eyes remained fixed on him, as if it somehow knew Jack represented its last hope. "Hang on, buddy," Jack whispered, striding purposefully toward the gathering of cruise passengers. "We're going to get you help." As he approached the group, he steeled himself for the battle he knew was coming. Corporate negotiations had taught him something useful after all. Sometimes you had to fight for what mattered. The cruise ship's staff was bewildered when Jack returned carrying the emaciated German Shepherd. "No, I'm not leaving him," Jack insisted when the excursion coordinator suggested the dog might belong to locals. "There's no one on this island. He's been abandoned." His voice carried an authority that surprised even himself. "Sir, we cannot allow an unvetted animal aboard the cruise," the coordinator explained patiently. "There are health regulations, international animal transport laws, and frankly, other passengers to consider." The woman's tone was sympathetic but firm. What happened next surprised even Jack. The man who once canceled a date because his dry cleaning wasn't ready now declared, "Then I'm staying too. You can pick me up on your return voyage." The words escaped his mouth before he could analyze their financial or professional implications. Calls to the captain and heated debates followed. Fellow passengers gathered around, some supporting Jack, others concerned about disrupting the itinerary. Eventually, Miranda Chen, the ship's doctor, came to examine the dog. "He's severely dehydrated and malnourished," she concluded, genuine concern in her voice. "I'm not a vet, but he likely won't survive without immediate care. His paw pads are raw, and there's evidence of salt damage to his coat. He's been here quite a while." That settled it for Jack. He requested emergency transport back to the nearest populated island, San Marcos, which had a veterinary clinic. 4 hours and several $1,000s later, Jack sat in a small veterinary office while Dr. Enrique Vega treated the dog. The walls were lined with faded posters showing healthy pets, a stark contrast to the animal lying on the examination table. "No microchip," Dr. Vega confirmed, running the scanner over the animal's thin body once more. "He's approximately 4 years old, well-bred from the look of his structure. Given his condition, he has been on that island for at least 2 months, possibly longer." How did he survive? Jack wondered, watching as fluids dripped into the dog's vein. "German shepherds are resourceful," Dr. Vega smiled. "Perhaps he found a fresh water source, hunted small animals, though without adequate fresh water, it's genuinely miraculous." The vet's expression betrayed his professional puzzlement. Later that evening, in a hastily booked hotel room, Jack watched the sleeping dog, now attached to an IV for hydration. He'd named him Crusoe. His phone buzzed incessantly with messages from colleagues needing urgent decisions, but for the first time in years, Jack set it aside without feeling guilty. "Just you and me now, buddy," he whispered. "I've canceled my cruise. Looks like we're both castaways now." That night, Jack dreamed of the ocean and a storm. In the dream, he was drowning, and a dog was swimming toward him through massive waves. But strangely, it wasn't Jack who was being rescued. The roles were reversed in a way he couldn't quite grasp. He woke with a start, heart pounding, to find Crusoe watching him from the foot of the bed, eyes gleaming in the darkness, unnervingly alert for an animal so recently at death's door. Over the next 3 days, Crusoe's transformation began. With proper nutrition, hydration, and medication, his eyes regained their alertness. The dull coat started to show patches of luster, and his body, though still severely underweight, no longer seemed on the brink of collapse. Dr. Vega was amazed at his rapid recovery. "He seems to have bonded with you," the vet observed as Crusoe followed Jack's movements with attentive eyes, whining softly whenever Jack stepped away. "This isn't typical behavior for a stray. He acts like he's known you before." There was something in the doctor's tone that suggested he found the connection unusual. Jack had extended his hotel stay indefinitely, postponing his return to Boston. His assistant was handling the crisis at work, though not without pointed comments about Jack's unexpected dog rescue sabbatical. His boss had been surprisingly understanding, perhaps recognizing that Jack's burnout had been building for months. On the 4th day, Jack took Crusoe for a short walk along the beach. The dog was still weak, but moved with increasing confidence. They passed a local fisherman repairing his net who stared at Crusoe with wide eyes, his weathered hands freezing mid-task. "Ese perro," the man exclaimed, dropping his tools. "¿De dónde lo sacaste?" His voice carried a mixture of shock and something Jack couldn't quite identify. Was it fear? Jack explained through broken Spanish and the fisherman's limited English. The man grew agitated, pointing to the direction of the uninhabited island, making gestures of a boat and waves. Jack couldn't understand everything, but he gathered that the fisherman recognized the dog. "Boat," Big storm. Man and dog. The fisherman pantomimed, drawing a large arc with his hand, then crashing it down. 3 months ago. Muy malo. Very bad storm. His eyes never left Crusoe, who was watching the man with unusual intensity. Jack's heart raced. You saw a boat capsize? With a man and this dog? The fisherman nodded solemnly, pointing to where search parties had looked. No find man, no find dog, all gone. He crossed himself. Como sobrevivió el perro? How survived dog? The question hung in the air between them. That evening, Jack contacted local maritime authorities. Yes, they confirmed. A small yacht had issued a mayday during a sudden squall 3 months ago. The American owner, Michael Reynolds, was presumed dead after extensive searches found no survivors. Only wreckage washing ashore days later. Was there mention of a dog on board? Jack asked, his throat tight. There was a pause as the officer checked records. Yes, he finally said. The mayday call mentioned the owner and his dog were the only ones aboard. Later, as Jack watched Crusoe sleeping peacefully on the hotel bed, a chill ran down his spine. How had this animal survived alone on that island for 3 months? And why did Jack feel such an inexplicable connection from the first moment their eyes met? He recalled the dog's behavior with the fisherman, almost as if it recognized the man's story, understood what was being said about its past. Jack had always prided himself on his logical mind, but nothing about this situation followed any rational explanation. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through news archives until he found a small article about the missing American yachtsman. The piece included a photo. Michael Reynolds standing proudly beside his custom yacht, a German shepherd sitting alertly at his feet. Jack studied the image, comparing it to the dog now sleeping on his bed. Despite the dramatic weight loss and condition changes, it was undoubtedly the same animal. But something else caught his attention. The man in the photo. There was something oddly familiar about him, though Jack was certain they'd never met. Jack's planned 1-week vacation had now stretched to 2 weeks on San Marcos. Crusoe grew stronger daily, his ribs less visible, his eyes brighter. The German shepherd's personality emerged. Intelligent, watchful, with an uncanny ability to anticipate Jack's needs before he expressed them. When Jack reached for the water bottle, Crusoe was already looking at it. When Jack felt a headache coming on, the dog would press against his leg, offering comfort before Jack had even rubbed his temples. Using the contacts provided by maritime authorities, Jack managed to track down Elizabeth Reynolds, Michael's sister and only living relative. Their video call was emotional as Jack explained the incredible discovery. Michael loved that dog more than anything, Elizabeth said, wiping tears. He named him Max after their childhood dog. They were inseparable. When Michael decided to sail around the world, he built special accommodations on the yacht just for Max. Her voice broke as she described how her brother had left his high-pressure job to find meaning in life. Jack felt a strange dissonance hearing the dog called Max instead of Crusoe. Yet the shepherd immediately looked up at the mention of his original name, ears forward, eyes alert. A reaction that sent goosebumps across Jack's arms. The authorities are processing paperwork for me to bring him back to the States, Jack explained. I'd be happy to bring him to you in Colorado. Elizabeth shook her head. Michael would want Max to be with someone who went to such lengths to save him. Besides, she smiled sadly, I'm fighting cancer right now. I can't give him the care he deserves. As the call continued, Jack learned more about Michael, a successful investment banker who had burned out, just as Jack was burning out. He said life was too short for spreadsheets, Elizabeth recalled. The day he quit, he bought that boat and spent 2 months learning to sail. Everyone thought he was having a midlife crisis. The parallels to Jack's own life were unsettling. After the call, he brought up a photo of Michael on his phone, studying it while Crusoe watched with unusual intensity. He looks like you, Jack told the dog, trying to lighten his own mood. Same serious expression. The night, a powerful storm hit the island. As thunder crashed, Crusoe became agitated, pacing and whining. When a particularly loud thunderclap shook the windows, he leaped onto Jack's bed, trembling violently. "It's okay, boy," Jack soothed, stroking the dog's fur. "Just a storm. We're safe." But Crusoe's behavior became increasingly distressed. He pulled at Jack's sleeve with gentle teeth, trying to drag him from the bed. When Jack resisted, the dog ran to the door, barking urgently, then back to Jack, repeating the pattern with growing desperation. "What is it? You need to go out?" Jack finally relented, thinking the dog needed a bathroom break despite the storm. The moment Jack opened the door, Crusoe bolted down the hotel corridor toward the emergency exit. Alarmed, Jack followed, calling after him. They ended up in the hotel's beachside garden, rain lashing down around them. Lightning illuminated the scene in strobing flashes, the wind howling through the palm trees, bending them at dangerous angles. "Crusoe, come back!" Jack shouted above the wind, already soaked to the skin. "It's not safe out here." The dog stopped, looking back at Jack with an almost human expression of urgency. Then he turned his attention to a small fishing boat that had broken free from its mooring and was being dashed against rocks near the hotel's beach. Jack hadn't noticed the vessel, or its occupant frantically trying to control it. A local teenager, maybe 16, was struggling with the oars, terror visible on his face even through the driving rain. Without hesitation, Crusoe plunged into the churning water, swimming powerfully toward the foundering boat. Jack watched in astonishment as the formerly weakened dog transformed into a powerful rescue swimmer, fighting through waves that would challenge even a trained lifeguard. "No!" Jack shouted as Crusoe disappeared beneath a wave, only to resurface moments later, still fighting toward the boat. Without thinking, Jack kicked off his shoes and dove in after the dog. The sea was a churning chaos of competing currents. Each wave threatened to slam Jack back to shore or drag him further out. Yet somehow he managed to follow Crusoe's path, occasionally glimpsing the dog's head above water. The coldness of the water shocked his system, the salt burning his eyes. Twice he went under, disoriented by the storm's fury, before fighting his way back to the surface. When Jack finally reached the boat, he found Crusoe had already made it there. The German shepherd was circling the vessel, barking instructions that the terrified boy somehow seemed to understand, using his oar to help the dog climb aboard. With the teenager's help, Jack also managed to haul himself into the small fishing boat. The three huddled there as waves crashed around them, threatening to capsize them with each swell. The motor was dead, and one oar had been lost to the sea. The boy, soaked and shivering, spoke rapidly in Spanish, pointing toward the shore that now seemed impossibly distant. "We need to secure a line," Jack shouted above the storm, spotting a length of rope in the boat. With numb fingers, he tied one end to the boat's bow and the other around his waist. "I'm going to try to swim back, pulling us in." The boy shook his head violently, pointing to the dangerous currents between them and safety. He was right. It was suicide. The waves would dash them against the rocks long before they reached shore. Crusoe barked sharply, drawing their attention. To Jack's astonishment, the dog seized the rope in his powerful jaws, looked at Jack with those intelligent eyes, and then dove overboard before Jack could stop him. "Crusoe!" Jack cried out, watching helplessly as the dog began swimming toward shore, the rope trailing behind him. The strength it would take to pull a boat with two people against those currents seemed impossible, especially for a dog still recovering from starvation. Yet Crusoe swam with a determination that defied logic. Jack and the boy helped by using the remaining oar to steer, avoiding the worst rocks. Inch by inch, they moved closer to shore, though Crusoe occasionally disappeared beneath the waves, only to resurface and continue his Herculean effort. By the time they reached the shallower water near the beach, a small crowd of hotel staff and guests had gathered, alerted by Jack's absence. They rushed into the surf, helping pull the boat the final distance. Crusoe collapsed on the sand, his energy finally spent. Jack knelt beside him, cradling the wet dog in his arms, tears mixing with rainwater on his face. The animal's breathing was labored, his eyes half closed with exhaustion. "That's not possible," whispered Dr. Vega, who had been called to the scene. "No dog has that kind of strength, especially not one still recovering from such severe malnutrition. It defies medical explanation. But as Jack looked into Crusoe's eyes, he saw something that transcended ordinary explanation, a wisdom and purpose that seemed almost supernatural. And suddenly, the strange dreams, the immediate bond, the impossible rescue, it all crystallized into a thought Jack was afraid to articulate, even to himself. The next morning broke clear and calm, as if the previous night's storm had been a fever dream. But the rescue was the talk of the small island, with local news interviewing the grateful parents of Carlos, the saved teenager. When they asked how a weakened dog had managed such a feat, Jack had no rational explanation to offer. In his hotel room, Jack sat on the balcony watching Crusoe, or Max, though the name still felt wrong somehow, sleeping peacefully in the sunshine. The events of the last 2 weeks had transformed both of them. For Jack, the change was particularly profound. The man who once measured life in quarterly earnings and client acquisitions now found himself contemplating a different kind of wealth. His phone rang, his boss calling again. This time, Jack answered. "Jack, this sabbatical has gone on long enough," came the impatient voice. "The Westridge acquisition is falling apart without you. We need you back in Boston immediately. I understand you've had some unusual experience with a stray dog, but surely you can arrange for animal control or a shelter to take it." 20 minutes later, Jack ended the call, having done something he would have considered unthinkable 3 weeks ago. He had resigned. The relief that flooded through him afterward was confirmation enough that it was the right decision. For years, he had been drowning in a sea of meaningless work, gasping for purpose, and somehow this dog, this impossible, miraculous dog, had thrown him a lifeline. That afternoon, as Jack and Crusoe walked along the beach, they encountered the fisherman who had recognized the dog. This time, with a proper translator, Jack learned the full story. "Miguel says there was something strange about the storm that night," the translator explained. "It came suddenly, unnaturally. The American's yacht was not far from here when it capsized. The search found pieces of the boat 2 days later, but never the man or his dog." The fisherman spoke again, his expression solemn, his weathered hands gesturing toward the horizon, and then to Crusoe, who sat watching him with uncanny stillness. "He says there is an old belief among island sailors. When someone drowns, their spirit sometimes enters another being, a dolphin, a seabird, or sometimes a beloved animal, to complete unfinished business or to watch over loved ones." Jack's skin prickled as the fisherman looked directly at Crusoe. "Miguel believes the American man's spirit is within his dog. That is how the animal survived alone on an island, without fresh water. That is how he knew to rescue the boy last night." The translator hesitated. "And that is why the dog found you." Jack wanted to dismiss this as superstition, but the events of the past 2 weeks defied rational explanation. The impossible survival, the immediate bond, the way Crusoe responded to his original name, the dog's impossible strength during the rescue, and most disturbing of all, the strange familiarity Jack had felt when looking at Michael's photograph, as if he were somehow looking at a version of himself. Later that night, alone with Crusoe, Jack whispered, "Michael, is that why I felt I knew you from the moment we met? Is that why you saved Carlos last night?" Crusoe simply rested his head on Jack's knee, amber eyes gazing up with an expression impossible to interpret. Yet in that gaze was a depth of understanding that no ordinary dog could possess. Jack thought of his old life, the stress, the emptiness beneath the success. He thought of Elizabeth's words. Michael was taking a year off to sail the world, to really live before returning to the corporate grind. He said life was too short for spreadsheets. Words that could have come from Jack's own doctor just 3 weeks ago. 6 months later, a converted van pulled up to a coastal overlook along the Pacific Coast Highway. Jack stepped out, breathing in the salt air, his business suits long replaced by casual clothes that actually fit the man he had become. From the passenger side emerged Crusoe, now healthy and strong, his coat gleaming in the California sunshine. After the events on San Marcos, Jack had indeed brought Crusoe back to America. The paperwork had been complicated, but with Elizabeth's help affirming the dog's original ownership and legitimate return to the States, the authorities had eventually cleared the way. They had visited Elizabeth in Colorado, where the dying woman had hugged the dog fiercely, whispering something in his ear that made Crusoe whine softly. She had pressed into Jack's hand a sealed letter that Michael had left with her just in case. "Open it when you're ready," she'd said. Now, standing on this peaceful overlook, Jack finally felt ready. He pulled the worn envelope from his journal and carefully opened it. Inside was a single page, handwritten. "To whoever finds this letter," it read, "if you're reading this, I didn't make it back. I hope Max did. He's stronger than I ever was. I set out on this journey because I realized I'd spent 15 years building a life that looked good on paper but felt empty inside. The ocean called to me because it represented freedom from the cages we build around ourselves with our ambitions and expectations." Jack's hands trembled as he continued reading words that could have been taken directly from his own heart. "Whoever you are, if you've found Max, I ask two things. Love him as I did, and learn from my delayed awakening. Don't wait to live the life that calls to your soul. We think we have all the time in the world until suddenly we don't." The letter was signed simply Michael Reynolds, with a date just days before the fatal storm. Jack looked at Crusoe, who sat watching him with those knowing eyes. 6 months of traveling together had created a bond deeper than Jack had ever known. They had hiked mountains, slept under stars, and met people who had helped Jack rediscover parts of himself long buried under spreadsheets and ambition. "I don't know if his spirit is in you," Jack said quietly to the dog, "but I know you saved me as surely as I saved you." Crusoe pressed his muzzle into Jack's hand, the same gesture from their first meeting on that island beach. As the sun began to set over the Pacific, Jack thought about the new foundation he was establishing with his savings, one dedicated to training rescue dogs and supporting animal welfare. He thought about the book he was writing sharing this incredible journey. Neither would make him as financially successful as his old career, but both filled him with a sense of purpose his previous life had lacked. "Thank you," he whispered, not entirely sure who he was thanking, Crusoe, Michael, or perhaps the mysterious workings of a universe that had brought them all together in ways he would never fully understand. Crusoe barked once, joyfully, then raced down the path toward the beach below, looking back as if to say, "Are you coming?" Jack laughed and followed, running with an abandon he hadn't felt since childhood. Whatever forces had brought them together, he was grabbing this second chance at life with both hands. The mysterious connection between a lost sailor, a miraculous dog, and a man who needed rescuing himself had created something beautiful. A story of courage, purpose, and new beginnings. Whether Michael's spirit truly lived on in Crusoe didn't matter in the end. What mattered was the life they were building together, one adventure at a time, far from the confines of glass, office towers, and spreadsheets. And in that, both Max and Michael had found their way home after all. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Share it with someone who loves inspiring stories and help us spread messages of courage and hope. Sometimes the most miraculous rescues are the ones where we're not sure who saved whom.